Buying and selling a home at the same time is stressful no matter what you do, especially if you live in British Columbia and particularly in the Lower Mainland in and around Vancouver. I'm not going to sit here and try to pretend that I can take that stress away, and frankly, any agent that says that they can is just lying to you. Now, if you do this wrong, unfortunately, it's going to cost you a ton of money. It's probably going to cost you the home that you actually wanted and a ton of emotional stress in the meantime. But done right, you make a calm decision when things go wrong, because inevitably, something always goes a little bit sideways. And with the right strategy, at least you don't panic when things do go a little bit wrong. You plan for it. And really, that comes down to one big move that you make before you ever even list the home. So the thing that actually matters here is managing your stress and taking smart steps so that you don't blow up the whole deal in the process when something goes a little bit sideways. Most videos that talk about this stuff, they just talk about the pros and the cons of buying first or selling first, and we will go over that. But I'm here to tell you that that actually doesn't really matter very much. The real choice here is to pick a strategy and know who you are from the start. And ultimately, commit to that strategy so that when things get hard, you know exactly what you're doing because you decided upon that well ahead of time. You know what strategy you chose and you stick with it. Now, ultimately, there are only two ways to do this. The first way, of course, is that you sell your home first and then you go buy something. And the second option is to buy first and then sell your home after. And usually that means you're doing something like a subject to sale offer, or maybe you're bridge financing or whatever. There's a couple of ways to do this. But ultimately, those are the two strategies. Those are the two pathways that you can choose. So let's talk about those two strategies. We'll break them down a little bit so you understand a little bit better what they actually entail. If you decide that you want to sell first, you get the strongest negotiation power. And what I mean by that is you're probably not making a subject to sale offer in that sort of a situation. So you're able to provide the sellers of the home that you are trying to buy much more certainty in the transaction. And certainty has real value, especially in a buyer's market like we're in right now. Now, of course, there are downsides. So while you do get more negotiation power, once you sell, you're selling. There's no backing out after that. So it's very, very important that you have a backup plan for if you don't find something or you can't line up the dates exactly right for selling your home and then buying the next one. Because while ultimately that is the goal, is we want to line the dates up exactly perfectly, it doesn't always work out that way. And being homeless isn't a good option for that in-between time. So having a backup plan is really, really important if you do elect to sell first. Now, of course, the other option is buying first. And the big upside to doing it this way is that you have an out. So what this would look like is you're writing your offer subject to sale of your current home. And if you don't end up selling your home, then you don't proceed with the purchase. Now, that is a pretty big benefit, but of course that comes with a downside as well. Generally speaking, you're not going to have anywhere near as much negotiation power if you are writing a subject to sale offer. Because, like I said, there is real value in certainty to a seller. And if that seller has to rely on you selling your home before they sell their home, well, that's a whole other layer of uncertainty that they have to manage. It becomes, and can become quite complicated, and it's almost like a series of dominoes that all have to fall over at the right time in the right way to make the whole chain of transactions work. So like I said at the beginning, both options work, and really the important thing here is to know who you are before you choose which way you want to go. And often we hear that, buying first feels safer to people, and that can be right or wrong. It really just depends on who you are as a person. Later on in the video, I'm going to tell two stories, and they're stories of clients of ours that each chose a different strategy, and in both cases, something went a little bit sideways, but in both cases, they stuck with their strategy and it ended up working out very, very well for them. So you might be asking, okay, well, how do I know what strategy is for me? if you are a person who is very, very particular, you could say picky, but I don't want to say it like that because that sounds negative. If you're very particular, you have a very clear and very specific picture of what your next home needs to look like. And if you don't find that perfect home, you're not going to do the move, then buying first probably makes more sense for you. But you have to accept the fact that you're not going to have as much negotiation power when it comes to making that purchase. Now, if you are someone who is more flexible and who isn't as concerned about what the next home necessarily looks like, as long as it sort of fits certain criteria, and you're more concerned about getting the best deal that you can, generally speaking then, selling first is going to be the winning strategy for you. Now, the reason I mentioned getting the best deal is because ultimately you're probably going to be competing with other people who are writing subject to sale offers. Most people tend to buy first before they sell because it often feels safer, but like I said, that's not actually the case. But ultimately for you, if you are someone who does choose to sell first, you've got a big leg above all of those people who need to sell their home, so they need to write a subject to sale offer because you can give that seller certainty. And we see it all the time. There is real, actual, tangible value in that certainty. And that can mean $5, $10, $20, $30,000 of difference. It really depends on what scale of home you're buying. But we're not talking about a couple dollars here. Like, this is serious value, serious money. So it is genuinely worth consideration before you decide which strategy you want to go for. Now, there is a particular note that I want to make here about buying your home first, about writing a subject to sale offer. This is really, really important. If you are choosing to go down this road or use this strategy, then pricing and marketing your home becomes even more important, especially in a buyer's market like we're in right now in the Greater Vancouver area. Now, the reason I say this is because right now inventory is super high. And if you've been following the real estate market, that this really shouldn't be a surprise to you, but we are in a buyer's market. Inventory is very, very high all across the Lower Mainland. And the way that we quantify it being a buyer's market is with this number right here. It's the sales to actives ratio. So we're sitting at about 13% now across the Greater Vancouver area. And what that means is that 13% of homes that get listed actually end up selling. Now, typically between 15 to 20% approximately is more of a balanced market where prices stay relatively flat. Above 20% becomes much more of a seller's market where you typically will see prices start to increase. But we're in a buyer's market right now. That's not what's happening. Prices in most areas are still slowly going down, at least right now. So because of that, it's really important that you don't price your home too high. The right strategy here is not to price it high and then cross your fingers and hope that something happens. You need to be accurate with your pricing and accurate with your marketing and know who your buyer is going to be. Because if you price your home to sit and then you make a subject to sale offer on another property, that listing agent is going to look at your listing and they're going to advise their clients that you are way out to lunch on pricing. So you either need to increase your dollar value of your offer a fair bit, or they're just going to advise their clients not to even bother. Because there's no benefit to them in tying up their property with a subject to sale offer that's never going to sell. So pricing your home correctly adds a lot of credibility. It adds a lot of weight to that subject to sale offer that you're writing. So I mentioned I have a couple of stories. I'm going to jump into the first one now. So these are real client stories. I'm not going to use their names, of course, but I'll talk about the situation and how the strategy that they chose ended up working out for them. So this first story, it's a client that elected to choose the buy first strategy. They had a very particular idea in mind of what they wanted to move into. They had a very particular neighborhood that they wanted to move into. So we ended up going and finding them that home first. We still had their home listed in the meantime, and we were going out and looking at homes basically from the very beginning. But the idea was that they wanted to make sure that they could get what they wanted at a price point that made sense to them. So in this case, we ended up finding the home, we negotiated well, and we ended up getting it under contract for a pretty good price despite the subject to sale. Now, part of that, of course, was us sharing with the listing agent on the other side that we had priced it properly, we were marketing it very aggressively, all those kinds of things. And at that point, we also had a very, very interested buyer that was basically getting themselves ready to write an offer. So we passed that information along to the listing agent when we wrote up our contract. And ultimately, it gave the seller on the other side much more certainty in working with us. Now, like I mentioned, things often end up going sideways. So in this case, at the very last second, the buyers for our client's home ended up backing out at the last second. They'd gone through inspection, they had their financing all sorted out. They just ultimately ended up getting cold feet. So that goes to show you, even when you line things up perfectly, things can still go wrong. And here's where having that strategy decision locked in ahead of time really paid dividends. Because when it went wrong, we went back to that strategy. And the first thing that we asked them was, do you still want to do this? Because you always have the option to back away, try again in a few months. But for them, it wasn't an emotional decision, even though this was a frustrating experience. Because they had already decided on their strategy early on, and it was very, very clear. They knew that if they could get this particular home, they wanted to move forward. They wanted to go ahead with the plan. And if they couldn't get this particular home, then that was fine. They would walk away. So they ended up making the decision of, yes, we're going to keep going, but we need to make sure that we get this particular home. And if it doesn't work out, that's okay. We'll take a step back and we'll try again later if that happens. That meant that it was time for us to get to work. We dug up everybody who had come through the home. We doubled down on our marketing. We got it in front of as many people as we possibly could. And through that hard work, we ended up finding another buyer who was ready to go and who wanted to work with us. But in the meantime, we also had to go back to the sellers and renegotiate. We needed more time because these new buyers needed time to go through their due diligence, of course. And really, the sellers didn't want to do this, but it helped that we had built a good relationship with the agent on the other side. He knew that we weren't just screwing around. He knew that we were serious, and he helped us convey that to his clients as well. Ultimately, it ended up working out very well for these guys, despite that speed bump in the middle of the transaction. They ended up getting the home that they wanted. They sold their home for a price that made sense to them, and despite the frustration, they stuck to their strategy, and that's what helped make this work. Now on to the second story, and this one is a client who elected to sell their home first. These clients had a good backup plan in place. They knew that if they ended up selling and they hadn't found something to purchase yet, they could go and move in with family temporarily. They were happy to do that, and it wasn't ideal. They didn't want to have to do that, but they knew that if it happened, they had that as their plan B. So we listed their home, and lo and behold, it sold quite quickly and for a very, very good price. We actually ended up in multiple offers. Now, we had gone out and already started looking at homes, so we had a reasonable idea for what was out there, but this offer came in a little bit earlier than we expected and ultimately just sort of worked out. It was an offer that they couldn't really say no to. And these guys were fairly clear about what they wanted. They actually did have some pretty key specifications. They had some things that they needed to see in that next home. And unfortunately, it ended up getting to the point where we had seen basically all of the homes in the area that they wanted to be in, and none of them quite fit. So we had to get a little bit creative. There was a home that had come up on their radar, but the MLS listing had like 3 pictures. There was nothing of the inside, and we knew that the home needed a fair bit of work. Through some discussion, these clients ended up deciding to pivot. They, rather than trying to find a home that fit perfectly, that had already been renovated in the way that they wanted, they decided to go a different route and do the renovations themselves. That way they could get exactly what they wanted. And of course, part of that was making sure that the budget made sense, making sure that the property made sense, and of course, getting it at a price that left room for the renovations that they wanted to do. And here's the key thing. Yes, they did pivot, but they didn't abandon their strategy. Instead of holding out for a renovated home that just didn't exist, we found one that they could turn into exactly what they wanted. And it made sense for them to do that because ultimately this was a 10, 15, maybe even 20-year plan for them. This is not something that they're going to live in for a couple of years and then move up. So the strategy was solid enough that they could absorb that pivot without really much stress at all. It didn't change the strategy. We just had to navigate through what was happening in the market at the time. So there you have it. two completely opposite strategies, but two very happy endings. And the commonality between them is they both locked in a strategy early, and they both stuck with it when things got hard. Because the danger and where most people make mistakes is letting their emotions kick in and letting their emotions decide what they do. Picking a strategy early and sticking with it helps you back off that ledge when things get tough. And that's why we talk strategy at the very beginning, before anything is on the line. That way you can make the decision with a clear head before things get difficult and before any problems come up. Now, it is important though that everybody's on the same page. So often, we get couples that are buying together or families or whatever. It's important that everybody's on the same page, because you can't have one person on one strategy and one person on another. That doesn't work. And ultimately, us as your agents also have to be on that same strategy. We have to know what's important to you, because that's our jobs. We need to be able to problem solve, but we need to be able to do so knowing what your best interests are. So if you're asking yourself, okay, well, what do I do with this information? The first and most important thing is understanding who you are first. Decide who you are, decide what you want, and decide what you are willing to walk away from. Then hold the line and stick to your strategy. If you are thinking about making a move, you live somewhere in the greater Vancouver area, and the things that I've said today make sense to you, there is a link in the description down below. You can book a time to chat with us. Because while this information's great, ultimately what you care about is how this applies to you and how you can use this to your advantage to make sure that you're making the best choice that you can make for your family. Anyway, that's enough for today. I'm Angelo with the Atlas Group. See you in the next video.